The flames caught instantly. $8 million worth of legal documents curling into ash as 200 million viewers watched Elena Voss hold the burning contract above her head on the biggest talk show in America. Nathaniel Pierce sat in his penthouse office, whiskey glass frozen halfway to his lips, watching the woman who just made him look like the villain of the century. He had 48 hours to destroy her career. What he didn't know was that she'd already destroyed his first. But let me take you back 6 months, because this story doesn't start with fire. It starts with paint. Elena Voss stood in her cramped Brooklyn studio at 2 in the morning, her fingers stained with cadmium red, staring at the eviction notice taped to her easel. 30 days. She'd been a professional artist for 7 years, scraping by on gallery commissions and teaching art classes to kids in the Bronx. Her mother's medical bills from the cancer treatment had wiped out everything she'd saved, everything she'd built. The city she loved was pricing her out one rent increase at a time. That morning, like every Tuesday, she took the subway to her second job, the only thing keeping the lights on. Elena cleaned offices. Specifically, she cleaned the executive floors of Pierce Industries, one of the largest tech conglomerates in the country. The irony wasn't lost on her. By day, she scrubbed the toilets of billionaires. By night, she created art about income inequality that those same billionaires would never see. She'd been invisible to these people for 3 years, just another woman in a gray uniform pushing a cleaning cart. Until the night Nathaniel Pierce worked late. He'd walked out of his office at midnight, tie loosened, exhaustion carved into his face. Their eyes met for exactly 3 seconds. Most executives looked through people like Elena. Nathaniel looked at her like he was actually seeing a human being. He'd asked, "Long night?" She'd replied, "Every night," surprising herself. And then he'd noticed her hands. The paint stains she could never quite scrub away, permanent reminders of her real life bleeding through into this borrowed one. "You're an artist." It wasn't a question. Something in his voice made her defensive. "I clean offices. The art doesn't pay." "May I see your work?" She should have said no, should have recognized the danger in a billionaire's curiosity. But Elena was tired and broke and so desperately hungry for someone, anyone, to see her as more than invisible hands that emptied trash cans. She pulled up her portfolio on her phone, watched his expression shift as he scrolled through her paintings. Urban landscapes, working-class portraits, the beauty and brutality of survival in a city that chewed up dreamers. "These are extraordinary," Nathaniel had said quietly. "Are you showing at galleries?" "Small ones. Nothing that pays rent." What happened next changed everything. Nathaniel Pierce made her an offer. Nathaniel Pierce made her an offer. Not as a billionaire to a cleaning woman, as one human being to another, or so she thought. He wanted to commission a series of paintings for Pierce Industries' new headquarters, 20 pieces. Her vision, her voice, her truth about the city. He'd pay her $200,000, enough to cover her mother's medical bills, her back rent, and give her a year to just create, to finally be the artist she'd been fighting to become. Elena said yes. How could she not? For 3 months, she painted like her life depended on it, because it did. She created her magnum opus, a series called Invisible America. Every piece showed the hidden workers who kept cities running, the delivery drivers, the night janitors, the home health aides, the people the wealthy never saw. Nathaniel came to her studio every week to check the progress. They'd talk for hours about art, about purpose, about the growing chasm between those who had everything and those who had nothing. He listened in a way that made her feel heard for the first time in years. She started to believe he was different, that wealth hadn't completely disconnected him from humanity. She was wrong. The day she delivered the final painting, Nathaniel's assistant handed her a contract. But it wasn't payment for services rendered. It was a buyout agreement. Pierce Industries wanted to purchase the entire series, Invisible America, outright. All reproduction rights, all ownership, everything. They'd pay her $8 million, more money than she'd ever dreamed of, enough to never worry again. There was just one condition buried in the legal language. She could never create or discuss themes of economic inequality or labor rights in her art again. The contract included a perpetual non-compete clause that essentially silenced her, the only voice she'd ever had. Elena read it 3 times, her hands shaking. Then she looked up at Nathaniel, standing in his $1,000 suit in her paint-stained studio, and finally saw him clearly. This whole thing, the commission, the conversations, the interest in my work, this was always the plan, wasn't it? Buy out the artist criticizing your world before she gets too loud. Nathaniel's expression didn't change. $8 million is a generous offer, Elena. It's a life-changing amount of money. You'd never have to clean another office. No, she said slowly. I just have to stop telling the truth. She threw him out of her studio, sold the series to a smaller gallery for $40,000, barely enough to survive another 6 months. But at least she owned her voice. She thought that was the end of it. Nathaniel Pierce thought differently. Within 2 weeks, strange things started happening. The gallery that purchased her work suddenly backed out, claiming funding issues. Elena's teaching position at the Bronx Community Center was eliminated due to budget cuts. Her landlord, who'd been flexible for years, suddenly demanded 3 months' rent upfront or immediate eviction. Every door she'd carefully propped open was slamming shut. And then the media story broke. Someone leaked to the press that Elena Voss, struggling artist and working-class hero, had turned down an $8 million offer from Nathaniel Pierce. But the narrative that hit the news cycles wasn't about artistic integrity. It was about stupidity, financial irresponsibility, a delusional woman too proud to accept help. The story went viral. She became a meme. The $8 million idiot. Comment sections filled with people calling her ungrateful, foolish, virtue signaling. If you can't stand people who use their power to silence others, let me know in the comments. Type, "Nobody deserves that." Because what Elena didn't know was that Nathaniel had a mentor, and that mentor was about to make everything so much worse. His name was Richard Holt, Nathaniel's advisor, his father figure since his own parents died, and the real power behind Pierce Industries. Richard had built his fortune by buying struggling companies, stripping them for parts, and destroying anyone who stood in his way. He'd taught Nathaniel everything, including how to neutralize threats. "The girl's a problem," Richard told Nathaniel over lunch at their usual spot, a restaurant where the waiters made more in tips per week than Elena made in a month. "She represents something dangerous, the idea that integrity is worth more than money. Let that narrative grow, and suddenly you've got workers everywhere questioning their place. I made her an offer, a generous one, and she refused, which makes her either stupid or dangerous. Stupid people fade away. Dangerous ones need to be destroyed." Richard leaned forward. "You want to run this company after me. You need to learn that mercy is expensive. Bury her." So, Nathaniel did what he'd been trained to do. He went on offense. He called in favors, pulled strings. Within a month, every gallery in New York had mysteriously decided Elena's work wasn't the right fit. Her previous collectors stopped returning calls. Art critics who'd praised her suddenly published scathing reviews. The invisible hand of wealth was erasing her from existence. Elena fought back the only way she knew. She talked to journalists, told her story, tried to expose the pattern. But who believes a broke artist over a billionaire with unlimited PR resources? Then, she got the call that changed everything. A producer from the Madison Cole Show, the biggest daytime talk show in America, wanted her as a guest. They were doing a segment on standing up to corporate America. She'd have 15 minutes on national television to tell her truth. Elena said yes immediately. She'd been silenced long enough. What she didn't know was that Nathaniel's team had orchestrated the entire thing. The green room smelled like coffee and desperation. Elena sat in her only good dress, a simple black number she'd worn to her mother's funeral, clutching the rolled-up Invisible America centerpiece. The producers had asked her to bring one painting to show on camera. A production assistant handed her the rundown. She'd be interviewed for 12 minutes. Madison would ask about the $8 million offer. Elena would explain her principles. America would finally hear her side. Then she saw the note paper-clipped to the script. "Mr. Pierce will be joining via satellite for rebuttal. Standard protocol for balance." Her blood went cold. She should have walked out, should have recognized the trap. But Elena had been invisible for too long. This was her chance to be seen, to matter, to fight back against a system designed to crush people like her. So she walked onto that stage. The interview started sympathetically. Madison Cole, queen of daytime television, positioned Elena as a folk hero, the struggling artist who said no to millions, the woman who chose dignity over dollars. Then Madison revealed the contract. Not the real one, the one that Elena had refused, a fabricated version that Pierce's legal team had prepared, removing all the problematic clauses, making it look like a straightforward payment for artwork. $8 million with no strings attached. "So, let me understand," Madison said, her voice shifting from sympathetic to skeptical. "You turned down $8 million with no conditions, no requirements, because..." Elena's stomach dropped. "That's not... There were clauses, restrictions on my future work. According to the contract Mr. Pierce provided, there were no creative restrictions." Madison turned to the camera. "Nathaniel Pierce is joining us now via satellite from Singapore."
The screen lit up with Nathaniel's face. Even through video, Elena could see the calculated coldness in his expression. Elena, I've never wanted to restrict your art. I wanted to support it. $8 million, no strings attached. You turned it down. That's your right. But now you're creating a false narrative about silencing and corporate manipulation when I simply made a generous offer. The audience murmured. Elena felt 200 million viewers turning against her. You're lying, she said, her voice shaking. The real contract is exactly what we've shown. Nathaniel's voice was gentle, pitying. Elena, I think your financial stress may have caused some confusion. Perhaps counseling would help? That's when something inside Elena snapped.
She stood up, walked to the table where the fabricated contract sat under studio lights, picked it up with hands that had stopped trembling because rage is steadier than fear. You want to gaslight me on national television? Her voice cut through the studio. You want to make me look crazy for having principles? Elena, Madison tried to interject, but Elena pulled out her lighter, the cheap plastic one she used to light candles in her studio when the power got shut off. This is what I think of blood money. She lit the corner of the contract. The flames spread fast. Elena held it up, let the cameras capture every second as $8 million worth of lies turned to ash in her hands. The studio audience gasped. Madison Cole's mouth fell open. And somewhere in Singapore, Nathaniel Pierce watched his carefully constructed narrative burn. You can't buy silence, Elena said, directly to the camera. You can't purchase principles, and you can't make me disappear just because I'm inconvenient to your conscience. The story broke 48 hours after Elena's TV appearance. Struggling artist or fraud? Elena Voss's hidden trust fund exposed. The article included bank statements, tax documents, and a revelation that shattered everything. Elena Voss wasn't a working-class hero scraping by. She was the estranged daughter of Catherine Voss, a venture capitalist worth $200 million. Elena had access to a trust fund she'd never touched, money she could have used at any time. The cleaning job, the financial struggle, the eviction notices, all technically true, but suddenly reframed as performative poverty. A rich girl slumming for artistic credibility. The internet turned on her instantly. The same people who championed #BurnTheContract now called her a hypocrite, a liar, a privileged fraud cosplaying as working class. Elena's phone exploded with death threats. Her address leaked online. She couldn't leave her apartment without cameras and protesters. And Nathaniel Pierce positioned himself as the victim. The billionaire who tried to help a troubled young woman, only to be publicly humiliated for his generosity. Elena released a statement trying to explain. Yes, technically she had wealthy parents, but she'd been estranged from them since she was 18, had refused their money on principle, had genuinely built her life from nothing by choice. But nuance doesn't survive on social media. The narrative had solidified. Elena Voss was a fraud. She lost it all in 72 hours. Her remaining gallery representation, her teaching opportunities, her credibility. Even the supporters who'd believed in her message abandoned her as a messenger too tainted to carry it.
1 week after burning that contract, Elena Voss sat alone in her studio, surrounded by paintings no one would ever show. And she realized that Nathaniel Pierce had accomplished what he set out to do. He'd erased her. But here's what nobody knew. Not Elena, not the media, not even Nathaniel. There was someone who'd been watching this entire disaster unfold with growing horror. Someone who'd pushed Nathaniel to destroy Elena, who'd orchestrated the character assassination, who'd taught him that mercy was weakness. Richard Holt. And Richard was about to learn that some lessons come back to destroy the teacher. You see, Nathaniel Pierce wasn't the man Richard thought he'd created. The night Elena burned that contract on live television, something in Nathaniel broke. He sat in that hotel room and watched her choose dignity over $8 million, the exact opposite of every value Richard had spent 20 years drilling into him. And he realized he'd become the villain in someone else's story. Nathaniel flew back to New York the next day, told Richard they needed to meet. Over lunch at that same expensive restaurant, Nathaniel asked a question that had been growing in his mind for weeks. The contract I offered Elena, the real one, with the non-compete clauses, that wasn't my idea, was it? Richard's smile was thin. I approved it. After you suggested it, after you explained why it was necessary. Nathaniel leaned forward. How many other artists have you done this to? How many voices have we silenced? 12 in the past 5 years. Activists, journalists, artists, anyone whose message might damage our interest. We don't censor them. We simply make their silence more profitable than their voice. It's elegant. It's evil. Richard laughed. It's business, Nathaniel. Don't go soft now because some pretty girl made a dramatic gesture. That's when Nathaniel made his decision. He'd spent 3 months investigating Elena to destroy her. Now he spent 3 weeks investigating Richard to expose him. What he found was worse than he'd imagined. Richard Holt had built his empire on systematic exploitation. Shell companies funneling money to offshore accounts, labor violations covered up with non-disclosure agreements, whistleblowers silenced with buyouts identical to what they'd offered Elena. And Nathaniel had the proof. Emails, financial records, testimony from 15 people whose lives Richard had quietly ruined. Nathaniel called Elena. She didn't answer. He called again and again. Finally, on the 7th attempt, she picked up. What do you want? Her voice was hollow. Haven't you destroyed enough? I need to show you something. Nathaniel's voice was urgent. Please, I know you have no reason to trust me, but Elena, you were right about everything, and I can prove it. She should have hung up, should have protected herself from whatever new torture he had planned. But something in his voice, genuine desperation, made her hesitate. They met in her studio, the same space where this nightmare started 6 months ago. Nathaniel brought boxes of documents, started laying them out on her paint-stained floor. Bank records, emails, a pattern of corporate silencing that stretched back decades. Richard Holt has been doing this for 20 years, Nathaniel said quietly. I'm just the latest billionaire he's trained to value profit over people. The contract I offered you, the media campaign against you, all of it. I thought I was protecting the company. But Elena, we weren't protecting anything. We were just silencing anyone who threatened to expose what we'd become. Elena stared at the documents. Why are you showing me this? Because you deserve to know the truth. And because I'm about to blow up my entire life, and I need someone to make sure this information doesn't disappear if Richard tries to bury me too. You're going to expose him? I'm going to expose all of it. Him, the company, my own complicity. But Elena, Nathaniel looked at her with something that might have been the first genuine emotion she'd seen from him. I need you to do something first. I need you to expose me.
Nathaniel proposed Elena would publish everything, not just Richard's crimes, but Nathaniel's own role in trying to destroy her. The fabricated contract on Madison Cole's show, the leaked trust fund information, every calculated move to silence her voice. You want me to ruin you? Elena couldn't believe what she was hearing. I want you to tell the truth, the whole truth, that I'm not a victim or a hero. I'm a billionaire who tried to buy your silence and then destroy you when you refused. Put it in your art. Write about it. Paint it. Make me the villain of your next series. Why? Because it's what I deserve. And because if we don't expose how this system actually works, how wealth insulates itself by silencing dissent, then nothing changes. You burn another contract and it means nothing. But if you show them exactly how the machinery of silencing operates, that's a story that matters. Elena spent 3 days reviewing every document he'd brought, facts-checking, verifying, making sure this wasn't another elaborate trap. It wasn't. Richard Holt had systematically exploited and silenced people for decades, and Nathaniel Pierce had been his willing student until the moment he'd watched someone choose principles over profit. Comment truth over power if you're Team Elena. The greed can't win. Now watch what happens when she finally gets to fight back with the full story. Elena made her decision. She created a new series, not paintings this time, a multimedia installation combining her artwork with documentary evidence. Every email, every financial record, every victim Richard Holt had silenced. And at the center of it all, a massive canvas showing Nathaniel Pierce's transformation from complicit billionaire to willing whistleblower. She called it the price of silence, but she didn't show it in a gallery. Elena partnered with an investigative journalism nonprofit. They published the full story, text, artwork, documentation, online, where it couldn't be bought out or buried. The story exploded bigger than #BurnTheContract ever had. Within 48 hours, Richard Holt was under federal investigation. Within a week, he'd resigned from Pierce Industries in disgrace. Within a month, 12 other victims came forward with similar stories of systematic silencing. Nathaniel Pierce testified against his mentor, provided evidence, took full responsibility for his own actions. He didn't try to position himself as a hero. He admitted he was a villain trying to do better. The company he'd inherited collapsed. Nathaniel lost almost everything. And Elena, her installation toured 15 cities. The art world that had rejected her suddenly called her a visionary. Museums wanted to acquire her work.
but she sold the entire series to a workers' rights organization for $1, with the stipulation that it remain free and accessible to the public forever. 6 months after burning that contract, Elena stood in her studio, a bigger one now, one she could finally afford, staring at a blank canvas. There was a knock at the door. Nathaniel Pierce stood in her hallway, wearing jeans instead of a suit, looking more human than she'd ever seen him. "I'm not here to apologize again," he said. "You don't owe me forgiveness, but I'm teaching business ethics at community college now, and I wanted you to know every semester I show your work, tell the whole story, make sure the next generation understands what I did wrong." Elena studied him for a long moment. "You destroyed my life." "I know. And then you helped me build something bigger than either of us." "You did that. I just finally got out of the way." She didn't invite him in, didn't offer redemption or romance or closure, but she nodded once, acknowledgement that people can change, even if forgiveness isn't required. After he left, Elena turned back to her canvas and began to paint. The final painting in Elena's new series, the one she'd started that day and finished 3 months later, showed two figures, one holding fire, one holding evidence. Neither savior nor villain, just two flawed people who'd been trapped in a system designed to silence truth and had somehow found a way to burn it down together. She titled it After the Contract. It sold at auction for $12 million. Elena donated every penny to a fund for artists who couldn't afford to turn down blood money, for cleaning staff going to night school, for anyone who'd ever been told their principles weren't worth as much as their price. The story of Elena Voss and Nathaniel Pierce became a case study. Not a romance, not a redemption arc, but something messier and more true. A reminder that the most powerful act of resistance isn't burning a contract on television. It's refusing to let them silence you after the cameras stop rolling. 3 years later, Elena received a letter. No return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping about Pierce Industries restructuring under new leadership committed to ethical practices, and a note in handwriting she recognized. "Some fires are worth starting. Thank you for lighting the match. In." She never responded, but sometimes, late at night in her studio, Elena wondered about the cost of principles in a world designed to make them unaffordable, about whether people could truly change or just learn to live with their scars differently. She'd probably never know for sure, but at least now, finally, completely, her voice was her own. And nobody, no matter how many billions they had, could ever buy that again. That woman who burned an $8 million contract? She didn't just survive. She transformed what it means to fight back. Because Nathaniel Pierce learned something that night. You can't buy someone who knows exactly what they're worth. And Alana learned that the most expensive thing in the world isn't what money can buy, It's what money tries to silence.